So Gales fled, but his wife remained to sell the paper to James Montgomery, and then this register became the Sheffield Iris, or just the Iris. How did this paper kind of differ, and what radical did it stay as radical as the Register? And like, what was the transition like, and what radical stuff did it do?
Well, it carried on the tradition, if you like, but Montgomery was his own man as well, and he was very much a poet, and he wrote some of his words became hymns, and so he was involved in the religious movement. And the statue of him outside the cathedral in Sheffield. So he was a big guy in Sheffield circles, but he was certainly saw himself and was seen by others as on the side of the people. So he probably wasn't as radical as Gales had been, but he did actually serve time in prison for what he published in the Iris. Again, publishing accounts of trials that were going on around the country, and where the authorities were clamping down on what in today's terms we would call a pro-democracy movement. I mean, really, that's what they were doing. They were supportive of anti-slave anti-slave trade campaigners. They were supportive of the campaign against enclosing the common land. They were supportive of all sorts of people's campaigns, but essentially they were pro-democracy campaigners, because there wasn't any democracy in this country at the time.
Sheffield's kind of historically city kind of built on protests and stuff and radicalism. So since the 1700s, when these papers were in their prime, has there been any more kind of alternative media and radical press from Sheffield in the 100 years since?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot. I mean, the thing with alternative media is it tends to spring up sometimes when there's an upsurge of activity and then die down a bit. But people keep the memory alive, and it returns in different forms. So around the time of the Chartist activity, in the middle of the 19th century, there was a paper called the Sheffield Free Press, and that was established by a guy called Isaac Ironside. He actually got himself elected to Sheffield Town Council at the time, and he was a big campaigner not only in workers' rights and male suffrage. He actually was quite advanced for his time and called for women to have the right to vote as well. So that was quite radical, and that was the Sheffield Free Press. For a time, one of his contributors, because they took stuff from outside the city as well, one of his contributors was Karl Marx, until eventually he decided Marx's stories, Marx's essays were too dense, and he said that they are entombing the paper, so he didn't want them anymore. So he wrote to Karl Marx and said, thanks but no thanks, which I don't think Marx took too kindly to. So that was the Sheffield Free Press in the Chartist days, 19th century. Fast forward almost a century to the 1970s, there was another paper called the Sheffield Free Press, which emerged from the the 1968 generation of protest. Very much a younger generation thing, protesting against, nationally protesting against all sorts of anything that's going, but locally, campaigning again for who takes issues on housing estates, campaigning for better public transport, all those sorts of issues, and reflecting some of what you said was the radicalism of Sheffield. And Sheffield has often prided itself that it's a welcoming place for refugees, people fleeing oppressive regimes. In the 1970s, a lot of people from Chile, after the coup in Chile, ended up in Sheffield. So the Sheffield Free Press at the time was reflecting, I suppose, that sort of alternative idea of Sheffield. And these things, they're forgotten by many, but they're not forgotten by everyone. If you go down to the Peace Gardens in Sheffield, those water features, the Holbury, whatever they're called, the things that flow, cascades, I think the Holbury Cascades. Well, Holbury was a Chartist activist. They're actually named after a Chartist activist. Again, a pro-democracy campaigner. That's who he was.
So finally, and not just in Sheffield but all over the world, all over the country, what are the importance of radical press and alternative media to give those who haven't got a mainstream voice, a kind of an alternative voice, a voice to broadcast their own ideas?
Well, I think if people don't have somewhere that they can express their point of view, and not just have a voice but have that voice listened to, then I think two things happen. One of two things: either they fall into despair and there's no hope about anything, and nothing is going to change, or they find other ways to express their view, potentially through antisocial or violent means. So actually, I think having your voice listened to, is essential for a healthy democracy. And so, it might sound a grand claim, but I think even a little local news sheet or something that's giving somebody a say is contributing to the sort of the democratic functioning of a healthy society.